Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Grace Morgan with the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, and today I'm joined by Kerrigan, President and CEO of Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, which represents over 33 million small businesses in America. Karen, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, Grace, great to be here. Great to see you as well.
Yeah, of course. So with all this COVID-19 stuff, there are so many different proposals and things going on. What are you hearing from small businesses across the country who are being impacted by COVID-19 and these stay-at-home orders?
Oh, it's really tough out there, Grace, as you can imagine. It's been a tough ho now for about 5 weeks, and a lot of uncertainty, a lot of pain, and then the uncertainty continues because it's pretty disjointed out there in terms of how states are incrementally opening their economies, number one. And then, on the federal side, relief, coming from Washington, it's been a little bit chaotic with respect to, both the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP loans, as well as the EIDL loans. So, so there's been that story of pain and everything they've had to do to tell their employees and really concerned about the future of their operations. But then on the other hand, there's a lot of stories of optimism, resilience, and grittiness as well, in terms of how they're really grinding it out, how they're pivoting, collaborating, doing different things with technology. A lot of them are saying, look at it, now I'm well prepared to get on the other side of this crisis.
Yeah.
And they're ready to go. I mean, they know they can open safely and hygienically and do all the things they need to do to at least get some revenues into their firms and then bring back some of their employees.
Yeah, that's really critical. Can you share any specific stories that you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, on the pain side, there's been many of our members who went into 2020 believing this was going to be their best year ever. There was a lot of momentum over the past 3 years in terms of their growth and their scaling. And so they've made investments, expanding, signing new leases, bringing on new employees.
Sure.
And then bam, this hit like a rock. And then the plunging revenues and the uncertainties from that. So, everything from restaurants who have just opened, members who decided to go to another location, building new event spaces, opening new retail. This has just been really, really difficult for many of them, just in terms of what do I do next? And again, they're really sort of digging deep, being as creative as they can, working with their creditors and trying to extend things out. And again, that's where some of these federal loan programs came in to be, in terms of, if I could just hang on till I get this,
Sure.
Then maybe I can make it to the other side, another 4 weeks and I'll be good to go. But the things have extended and have been uncertain, and there's a lot of problems with those programs. So, I think you get it in terms of what they're facing, particularly if they went into 2020 very, very confident and just really risked a lot. And that's what we want small business owners to do, right? They're risk takers, to expand and grow. So, yeah, they've got a lot on their plate right now.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And especially since these stay-at-home orders have been implemented, it seems like things just keep getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. So trying to plan for any sort of future, for a retail location, online location, being an entrepreneur can be especially difficult when you don't, for anyone, you don't know. There's so much unknown there.
Of course. Even in good economic times, it's very competitive, very tough out there. And small businesses have to compete and pivot every day, particularly given the rapid change of the marketplace on a global and a domestic basis. So, but they always try to look to the silver lining, moving a lot more stuff online. We had one business owner who had a major tutoring, company in Northern Virginia. She has 300 tutors working for her. Everything was face-to-face, right? Engagement with students, helping them prepare for tests. But then boom, this hit. Now everything's online, scheduling, using platforms to do, one-on-one type of tutoring. And she said, Karen, I'm no longer a regional company in Northern Virginia. I am national now. So she embraced that, right?
Wow.
So there are those stories as well of business owners who immediately took action, went through the emotional toil, and said, I have to do something. And then they recognized the opportunity. So
Yeah.
So that's sort of the good news on the good news front.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to PPP, could you give a brief overview of what this program is and how it impacts the small businesses?
Boy, to be brief on this program, particularly, yeah, right, Grace, given all the headlines. I mean, this
Yes.
has sort of dominated the news cycle for how many days? Who knew that SBE Council would be living in PPP land, at the beginning of 2020 in terms of our very aggressive agenda that we had for 2020. But, in a nutshell, it is a lending program using the SBA, using their nationwide network of lenders that they traditionally do SBA 7A loans out of. And so the drafters of the legislation use that basic framework and that network to provide loans up to $10 million, some of it forgivable to small businesses if they use it for payroll during a certain 8-week window, and other and other sort of non-payroll emergency expenses. So that's it in a nutshell. It's so much more complicated than that, though,
Yes.
Grace. It's been crazy. And so we're working very hard on improvements. And the big thing is, obviously there's been the headlines of the people like the LA Lakers and other businesses like that applying for it.
Yeah.
But when this was passed in that period of time, the PPP itself has become very obsolete. And we could talk about that in terms of now what needs to be done to make it more effective for small business.
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask if you were satisfied or what you think could be done more on PPP.
Well, gosh, hindsight being 2020, but we advocated from the very beginning, even before that first tranche of money and the first dollars were going into the accounts of small business owners, to bring in the big fintech lenders online. And so that happened, but it happened too late because they have speed, they have AI, they have technological tools that the traditional lending institutions don't. So we did a lot of work on that, but unfortunately they came into the fold right when that first tranche of PPP money ran out.
Yeah.
So and they reach a lot more small businesses between the Intuits, the PayPals, the Squares of the world. They have millions and millions and millions and millions of small businesses between them. And those are the smallest of small businesses that we wanted this money to hit.
Sure.
So hopefully on the second tranche, with them in the game, we'll be able to reach more small businesses. I think the biggest piece now is moving forward. Again, the legislation was done during a period of time. Who knew? I mean, the cascading impact and the horrific nature of this from an economic perspective, who knew we'd be where we are, and that the states would extend some of their stay-at-home periods to June 10th, for example, in the state of Virginia.
Yeah.
That affects economic activity. So the couple of things that we're looking for: number one, there's a June 30th deadline date in the legislation that's become very obsolete, that small businesses have to use this money to be forgiven. We want that extended out much further, maybe till the end of summer, maybe till the end of the year. The second thing we want changed is this 8-week window that small business owners have to use this money in order for it to be forgiven. So once that money hits their bank accounts, they have 8 weeks to use it to bring back their employees in order for it to be forgiven. Well, that doesn't make sense if the economy still is in a horrible position.
Yeah.
And they're just going to end up putting those employees back on unemployment insurance anyway. So they need more flexibility in saying, okay, I'm going to start in a month bringing people back on. That makes sense. And then I think two more quick things. One, and this wasn't in the legislation, but was done by the Treasury Secretary, was the 75-25% rule that only 25% of the total forgiveness piece could be for other expenses, and all the rest had to be for payroll. I'm like, there's like dry cleaners and restaurants. Well, dry cleaners that might have 3 or 4 employees, but their biggest expense is their overhead, in terms of their rent. In a high cost area, it's very expensive. Their utilities, very energy intensive. So that's not fair to them. So again, we need flexibility, let the business owner decide where they want to go. And then lastly, in the other categories of utilities and essential expenses, we want to include technology tools and other related services like cloud services, how they help small businesses operate in the modern economy, these licenses, right, for software to
Yeah.
cover their payroll expenses. These have become essential expenses now, given
Sure.
work at home and all of that. So those are the key areas. And sorry I went on so long, but
Oh, you're
I
fine.
wanted to give them some context in terms of
Yeah.
why they were important.
And this was only helps illustrate what PPP is and how it's actually affecting and helping small businesses across the country. It's hard to imagine the 8-week period you were describing. If these businesses can't even open, how do they expect them to recover after the 8-week period if a lot of these states aren't reopening in the first place?
Well,
Um,
bingo.
it's like putting them in handcuffs and saying like, good luck. It's very unfair.
It's very unfair and it's disruptive. And, I doubt very much that the employees would come back without saying, well, is this a guarantee for the end of the year, or back to business as usual? I mean, I've worked here for 5 years. Are we, is this going? And a business owner can't necessarily say that, yeah, this business is going to be operating as back to normal as it used to before, because again, there's a lot of unknowns out there, right? Who's to say when a state reopens, something might not happen, and there has to be another shutdown order,
Yeah.
or if the economic effects stay with us much longer, which I think they will. And there are some sectors of the economy that will be able maybe to jump back in as more quickly than others, and consumers respond to those services and those products, I think, in a way that's different from other sectors. So anyway, so we need this to be as flexible as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to something you mentioned earlier, we obviously in the news we've heard a lot, and there's been a lot of pushback about various companies and institutions, from restaurant chains to hotels and even the Los Angeles Lakers receiving PPP loans. And now we're hearing other big businesses like some national broadcasters are trying to get their cut as well. What are your opinion on these larger companies accepting taxpayer funds?
Some of these big businesses, they definitely took advantage. Excuse me one second. They definitely took advantage working at home, right? You never know what device is going to go off next.
Exactly.
They definitely took advantage of, some of the loopholes, I guess, if you will, and sort of the breadth of the types of businesses that would be included in this. And there's sort of what's legal and there's what's right. So you have some of these businesses that have ample resources, at their disposal. And it was wrong because it wasn't really within the spirit or intent of the legislation. So, I'd say shame on them. Obviously, some of their brands have been impacted by this. The businesses like Shake Shack, they gave it back right away. I think they'll be okay.
Yeah.
There's others who continue to hang on to the money, but it's wrong because obviously it was meant for real small businesses that don't have any source of capital and wouldn't be able to get on the other side of this without having that capital. And so I think the public companies and those bigger businesses have woken up and maybe they're backing off. But you're right, there are others like the broadcasters that seem to really have no shame and are moving forward and still trying to get an exception to this, where they still own those local stations, and many of them, the public companies. There are some independents out there, right? Just like there's independent radio stations. But just to continue to push to try to get, some of this money that should be going to independent businesses, franchise owners, right? I mean, sort of what you think of when you go down Main Street and you look at all the different types of businesses, startups, things like that, really is wrong. And I'm glad they were called out on it. And we'll see where it goes. But I just don't think the broadcasters should be getting this money. If they do, there definitely has to be some quid pro quo that they don't sort of they don't shut down their stations or have any blackouts, right?
Sure.
During this critical period, which is something that may happen in May, because of legislation that wasn't passed. So anyway, so yeah, it's wrong, and it just cuts into I don't know how many small businesses have gone under because they have not had access to this money. It's really sad, when you think about it.
Yeah, exactly. You think about these large restaurant chains like Ruth's Chris getting PPP loans, and then you think about all the small businesses on Main Street that are having to continue to stay closed and not be able to keep their employees on the payroll. And it's a question of, yes, it's legally right, but is it more like it's legally correct, but morally, it's not.
Yeah,
Not at all.
I agree. It's just I just can't believe that some of these firms did that. It's just it's mind-boggling to me. And yeah, so and when I think of our members, some of them who have applied for PPP loans, they never have asked the government for anything, not one thing, right? So taxes get taken out at the local level, state level, at the federal level. They're paying a lot of taxes. They want us to be left alone to do their own thing, to innovate and to grow. So even for them to say, well, I'm just going to go for this PPP loan. This is the one time that I think I need, this program. And if it can work for me, and for many reasons it hasn't. There was lots of delays, and we could talk for 10 hours here, to go over all these, but we won't. But then to have these larger businesses go in and sort of sweep up, huge amounts of capital that was needed immediately by small businesses in order to help them, make payroll and get through the month. It's a bad situation. So
shameful.
Yes, absolutely.
So when a lot of states are discussing right now the reopening, we're seeing a lot of campaigns across the country for reopen NC, Michigan, whatever it is. When you see these states reopen, do you expect on the small business side a large or kind of a smaller rebound?
It really depends because, there are certain businesses, certain sectors that have been essential, so they've been opening. So, they're already sort of in a position to, to sort of ramp up very quickly and to go when consumers are able to go and to feel more comfortable. But also depends on local conditions on the ground, right? So in New York City, is different, say, than, some small city in the Adirondacks in New York, right?
Yeah.
And the comfort level of the populace in terms of, going into stores and engaging. I would say this, in terms of most small businesses, they're prepared to open. They know what they have to do. They've learned a lot from the essential businesses that have been open in terms of how to do this right. They're learning from their peers. I mean, they're getting a lot of information from us in terms of what they need to do in order to open safely and to sort of operate in this new world, right?
Yeah.
Touch-free stuff, and if you're retail, more open space, more online type of sales, face masks, cleaning. I mean, you name it. The list goes on and on. Training, empowering your employees to make customers comply with your rules. So they're ready, and I do think the sort of how the economies respond really depend on how they were impacted to begin with, right? So, you're going to have, and the states that opened up more quickly, like a Texas, that's going retail to go, and they're incrementally ramping up. Florida, which again, I think is going to be a state that sort of rebounds very, very quickly. But the other question is this, if everything, we're getting back to sort of reopening, is if something happens where there is an infection or there's a lawsuit, which is another big issue, what does that do to sort of stunt, or sort of, kill the progress, that has been made to reopen? Just a lot of uncertainty. I would say that small businesses are ready, and they are in a position, they find themselves where they have to lead on this, where they have to make consumers very comfortable with shopping and getting out. So they have a lot to do with consumer confidence. and they are basically going to be in a position where public officials are going to get their confidence, from them as well. So they're on the front lines of this opening. A lot of pressure has been placed on them. Let's put it this way, during this whole crisis, and it doesn't end with the reopenings. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Karen. I appreciate you jumping on here to chat with me. It's great to see you, and I hope that your family continues to stay safe and healthy.
Yeah, and I would just encourage people, join us at SBE Council, sign up for our e-news, all of that, because we're providing the latest up to date on the PPP, all these other programs, and just good intelligence out there, I think, to help businesses, as they move into this reopening period, and hopefully, again, all this will be behind us. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Maureen. Yes.
Yeah, of course. And I just wanted to say one quick thing. Everyone should check out your website, of course. It's such a great resource for this, but also continue to shop and buy local.
Yes.
If you live in a community where you have the capability to order online, pick up from a coffee shop or a florist or anything like that that's still open and still operating under the social distancing guidelines, it helps tremendously.
Oh, that is such a great plug. And I wish I wore my new t-shirt, support local everything. And I'll be doing that tomorrow on our tomorrow, I should say. What is tomorrow? April 30th, right?
Yep.
On our Facebook Live feed. People can watch it though if they're watching this later than that. But yes, support local everything. Thank you for saying that. Yes, very important.
Yeah, it's so important. Anyway, thank you, Karen.
Thank you.